Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Liliana and on this channel we discuss history and literature related topics, so make sure to stick around if that interests you. So, in today's video I am going to be talking about my favorite historical dramas and films. This is a video idea that just came to me randomly last week, and I thought it would be cool because I know that people who like history are usually always looking out for new historical films or series to watch, and they want to know what other people who also like these series have thought about them. So that is why today I am going to put in my 2 cents and recommend some choice films and dramas to you. Let's get started. So my first choice is going to be really basic. I feel like you guys are going to be like, everybody's watched it, it doesn't even count. But I love it, and I think it is great and amazing and beautiful. And that is the series from 2010, Downton Abbey. So, you know, everybody has watched Downton Abbey, and everybody knows that it is amazing and great and beautiful, and all of the adjectives one could think of to describe it. Let me tell you about why I love Downton Abbey. Number 1. Character development. I feel like in a lot of series or movies, the characters don't necessarily develop all that much, or if they develop, it's done in a very awkward way, like, oh, you know, so-and-so. I feel like in most series and films, character development doesn't really happen that much, or if it does happen, it happens in a very awkward way. Like, you'll have a character that has some random, unprecedented, tragic event happen to them, and then all of a sudden from there on out they're a completely different person, and that's just kind of unrealistic. That's not really how it happens in real life. Usually in real life people are developed by a series of events that gradually mold and shape the person that they are becoming. That happens with a number of characters in Downton Abbey. You see characters such as Mary, Thomas, or Branson. So by the end of the series they're quite different from the person that they were at the beginning of the series, even though sometimes they still hold that little smidge of snarkiness. Mary. Another thing that I love about Downton Abbey is, yes, of course, the clothes. I feel like if I had watched Downton Abbey a couple of years earlier, I wouldn't have cared that much about the clothes. But since becoming more active in the YouTube community, I have discovered a plethora of sewing and historical fashion YouTubers, such as Bernadette Banner, Carolina Zabrowska, Rachel Maxey, Morgan Donner, Risa Britannia, among others. These ladies' content is what really got me into historical fashion and historical dress, and just kind of thinking more about the way people presented themselves in the past. It made me realize how important clothing and dress is in our everyday life, and how it can make several statements about who we are and where we come from. And so just the pleasure of seeing that on television, not just for aesthetic purposes, but also for historical and analytical purposes. It's so nice when you see something that you enjoy on film or in television, and you see that it's done right and it's done well, and you're like, ah, yes, they got it right. I don't have to sit here for like an hour and correct everything. I don't know enough about historical fashion to correct everything for an hour, but yeah. The last thing I have to say that I like about Downton Abbey is the incorporation of real history into the show. I feel like there are several historical dramas and films that are set in a historical time period, but they don't really seem to draw from the events that are going on during that time. For example, if you have a film that's set in the mid-1800s, they don't really draw on any of the historical events that are happening during the 1800s. They'll just have like the clothes, the carriages, and other forms of technology. In Downton Abbey, we see such events as the sinking of the Titanic, the Marconi scandal, the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918, among several others. And it really just enriches the plotline all the more and helps us get a better understanding of what life was like at that time and how political and social events affected people in their day-to-day life. On to the next one. This one is Juanaines from 2016. It was recommended to me by a friend and it can be found on Netflix. Juanaines is a historical series in Spanish about Juanaines de la Cruz, a young woman who was living in Mexico while it was still part of Spain in the latter half of the 17th century. I found it really interesting because Juanaines is one of my favorite historical figures. Starting from a very young age, she was a poet, a playwright, a mathematician, a philosopher, and a composer. And she did all of this during a time when most women weren't even allowed to learn how to read. And on top of that, she wasn't even a part of the wealthy class. She was the illegitimate child of a Spanish captain and an indigenous woman. All of the things that she learned how to do, she taught herself. She taught herself how to read Latin, how to write in verse, and how to do all of these amazing things. I love how the series about Juanaines really captivates her spirits and shows her as the kind of person who wasn't afraid to fight for what she believed in and who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself. Throughout the series, we see several instances of people telling Juanaines to stop writing because they know it's going to be bad for her. They know it's going to become her ruin because she's doing things that a woman isn't supposed to be doing at that time. And time again, she refuses to do it because she loves it so much. Even after she becomes a nun, she continues to study and expand her knowledge and become really the intellectual force within her convent. Another thing that's great about Juanaines is how the directors and the producers aren't afraid to have dark themes intermixed with comedy. I find that oftentimes with shows or television or books, it can be kind of hard to have something quite dark and disturbing and then a few pages later come up with something comedic. But Juanaines does this several times. However, the fact that they had this very dark content didn't stop the writers or the directors from also inserting humor into the series. For example, there's a scene where Juanaines is writing a play and she's having the other nuns in her convent perform the various parts. Hilarious that they, a bunch of nuns in a convent, are acting out flirtatious scenes for Spanish nobility. The next show that I'm going to talk about is from Amazon Prime Video, and it is called The Man in the High Castle, which ran from 2015 to 2019. And now, I know for those of you who have watched it, you're going to say, that's not historical drama because it never happened. I would like to argue against that. Man in the High Castle is basically a series about what would have happened if Germany and Japan had won World War II. It's set in the late 50s, so approximately 10 years after World War II would have ended, both Japan and Germany having a very tight authoritarian hold over the rest of the world. I find this concept so fascinating, even though it's alternative history. It's so interesting to think about, like, what would have happened? What would the world have been like if Japan and Germany had won World War II? And I think this series does a great job of doing that. I mean, when I was watching it, I noticed some random tiny details that just went further to reassert the fact that Japan and Germany had won World War II. They mentioned all of these things that had happened during the war and how these repercussions had played out in the following years to create that oppressed society. Another thing that's really great about The Man in the High Castle is the action. The Man in the High Castle has several intense scenes involving battles and rebellion. It has all of those things that you like about an action or a spy movie combined with history, which makes it so unique and so different. On a side note, I feel like all historical dramas are in two categories. They're either one, the quote-unquote fancy dress dramas where you have dainty ladies walking around in palaces with pretty dresses, or you have the World War II category. What the World War II category is, in my opinion, is just a mass collection of all historical dramas that are about wartime and have a main character who is a soldier in a war. And there's just a bunch of scenes of dirt and trenches and guns and loud things blowing up. And the reason I call it the World War II category is because most of them are about World War II. Come on now. You have to admit that most people that you know that are into history are dudes who like World War II and who memorized all of the different types of weaponry used during that war. At least the ones that I know are. Okay, on to the next one. I'm not going to have as much to say about this 4th series because I haven't finished watching it yet. I'm still only on season 1. This is BBC's Victoria from 2016, which I also found on Amazon Prime. I love Victoria because, first of all, the soundtrack is amazing. I'm biased because it's performed by a group that I like, so obviously I'm going to be a fan of the soundtrack. But apart from that, it focuses a lot more on Victoria's internal life, which is something that we can't really know from history. Her thoughts and her feelings and what she did day to day in her role as a new queen, because it starts before she becomes queen, and we won't ever have access to historically. Even if she, I don't know if she kept a journal or not, but even if she did, we don't know what she thought about things or how she felt about certain situations in her life. We have no way of knowing that. And I feel like the directors and the writers did an excellent job of portraying what a young Victoria's personality might have been like at the beginning of her reign. Okay, we are on to the last one. The last one is not a show, it is a movie from 2019 called The Professor and the Madman. And yes, I know The Professor and the Madman, the movie, is largely fictionalized. I know that a lot of the things that they have in there are kind of exaggerated more beyond what we know historically to get you into the feel. Sometimes the feels have priority over historical accuracy. Only sometimes, and this is one of those times. Professor and the Madman is a movie about William Chester Minor, a United States Army doctor, and James Murray, a linguist. Oxford University hired James Murray to write the first completely exhaustive dictionary of the English language, in which charting every single word ever at all and its history. James Murray knows that this is going to be a nearly impossible task, so what he does is he puts out an ad in the paper asking anybody with free time and a lot of books available to read these books and look for interesting words, them on slips of paper, and send them in to him. Obviously, James Murray, by looking at these slips of paper, he's going to look at various different words, and he's going to know how authors use them and how the definition has changed over time. One of the men who sends in an incredible amount of slips is the army doctor, William Minor. William and Minor become acquaintances/friends, which is very strange considering the time in which this movie is set, which is 1873. During those times, and even today, people tend to shy away from those with mental illnesses or mental disabilities, thinking that if they associate with them, it's going to be harmful in some kind of way. Earlier when I talked about historical inaccuracy, what I meant by that is not so much that they were inaccurate, more that they exaggerated some points. For example, from James Murray's own writings, we know that he went to visit William Minor several times and that they became acquaintances, that they used to like to chat. However, in the movie, we see them becoming much closer friends at this point than we know from historical records. Also in the movie, we see that Minor, even though he's in an insane asylum, falls in love with a woman, and she even begins to have some feelings for him in return. And we have no evidence of this whatsoever. But like I said before, in this case, feelings take precedence over historical accuracy because it's just so good to know that William Minor, even though he was in an insane asylum, found people who cared about him and loved him and looked out for his well-being, even though that's not necessarily what historical evidence points to. It's just really good to know that he has people looking out for him, you know? And another thing that is so amazing about this movie is you can tell that whoever wrote this script loves words and loves language to a great extent. And it's another thing that's really heartwarming to see. And that is the last historical media that I bring to you today. So, thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you can get notified whenever I put out a new video. Let me know in the comments any historical dramas or films that you might have watched.